From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm your host, Matt Larriman, and this is the podcast where we explore what local leadership really looks like in communities across the country. Not in theory, but in the real everyday work of building trust, solving problems, and shaping a future that people from all walks of life can believe in and want to help build together. Whether you were elected, appointed, or hired to serve a town, city, county, or school district, or you lead through a nonprofit or a community-based organization, this podcast offers you insight, encouragement, and practical ideas from people who speak from their own firsthand experience and hard-earned expertise about what it takes to be effective and successful in civic leadership. My guest today holds a very special place in the story of this podcast. Councilmember and Reverend Audrey Hartness-Reese of Westminster, South Carolina. We are recording this episode in person at the annual conference of the Municipal Association of South Carolina here in beautiful Hilton Head, and it is a real joy to sit down face to face. It was 3 years ago at this very conference in Charleston that time that Audrey and I first met. Just after I gave a keynote address, we struck up a conversation that frankly has stayed with me. And that exchange became the spark for what would eventually become Community Catalysts. I was honored that Audrey agreed to be my very first guest. Our episode aired on February 27th, 2024. And now we're back in South Carolina, coming full circle for a conversation that, as radio newscaster Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. Audrey Hartness-Reese, it's great to see you and welcome back to Community Catalysts.
Oh, thank you, Matt. It's great to be in person and it's great to be back.
In person, a little humid here in Hilton Head.
I told you earlier, we call that soupy.
Soupy is exactly what it feels like, especially for someone like me coming from the desert Southwest. Audrey, let's right up front acknowledge that you have some news to share, something significant in your journey of public service. Would you mind just sharing that news directly?
Yeah, so on August 12th, I am going to vacate my seat on the City Council for the City of Westminster.
Vacate means you're going to resign.
I'm going to resign. So I am leaving my term.
I know it's a decision that didn't come to you lightly, and I want to ask a few questions about that. What led you to that? What this moment means for you? Are you comfortable? Can I just ask you questions about this? Yeah. So, what prompted the decision?
So, when I was discerning whether or not to run, several years ago now, I kind of made a little bit of a deal with my church leadership, because I am a pastor, and with God, that the church was the higher calling. And because there was concern. The city council a cycle ago had a horrendous reputation for being very divisive, very negative. We were in the paper all the time and not in a positive way. When our city administrator was hired in 2020 or 2021, I can't remember, late 2020, early 2021, one of his goals was to revamp the image of our city council. Through the process of the special election in which I was elected, along with two other of my colleagues, that happened. That's something that I am very, very proud of us as a council for. We are not a divided council. We don't always agree. And we don't always like the way the other person votes or sometimes even speaks at times. But we have tried really, really hard, in public especially, to be civil with one another. But again, as you go and as you work together and get to know one another and grow together, issues and decisions come up and things get messy. And I was coming into a time where things were just getting messy with my role as a pastor, which is where you and I started. How does that shape my role as a councilwoman? And I think I have always sat on that council with a little bit of a trepidation of when is this rubber going to meet the road? And so the rubber met the road. And it was not even a significant one thing, one issue. There was not a big blow up because, again, I give my colleagues a lot of credit. We try very hard to be civil and to be respectful. And so the way that I have voiced this to everyone is church leadership started talking about this is feeling icky, for lack of better words, or this is feeling messy. And one specific leader said very clearly, I just don't like it. And I can't tell you why. And I understand, and you've done a good job. And so I went home and I sat on that for a long time.
You prayed on it.
Prayed on it for a long time, weeks. And did not leave that conversation with any directive from her. There was no mandate.
They didn't tell you that you had to resign.
Not. And I want that.
But they laid on you. So let me see if I get this. When you first decided to accept the appointment onto the council, you were helping to clean up a mess. You were helping to bring fresh air to a council. And you served for how long on the council?
3 years.
And
almost 4.
So somewhere in there was improvement. You felt it was gratifying. You were accomplishing it. And what? Then somewhere it just said, oh, this is running the risk of dipping back into the icky?
Yeah. To be candid, we were getting close to that. Even though in public we worked really hard at not. That unspoken tension you could cut with a knife in a room.
I'm going to ask you more about that since you said it's okay.
Yeah.
But let me let's walk through the process together a little bit.
Yeah. So prayed. And this is going to sound corny, but I laid down for a nap one afternoon. I'm a big fan of the 20-minute power nap. And I laid down, and I never have a problem taking a nap. And all I can say, Matt, is God woke me up and said, you need to contact your city administrator and ask how to resign. And so we started the conversation, and that's how it started. And what I have told folks, everyone, is I am very convinced and convicted and believe that God calls us to things. If I'm going to be that convinced and convicted that he calls us to it, I have to be that convinced and convicted that he calls us away from it. And so I am convinced that that was God waking me up, calling me away from this part of my service in Westminster.
Audrey, in our first interview, you told me,
I knew, even as much as I resisted it, that God had me in Westminster, not just for the folks that came into my church, but for the folks in my community.
And that sense of calling was central to how you viewed your role on the council. So with some distance now, how has your understanding of that calling changed? And is this about the calling changing or just kind of discovering new ways to live your calling?
I think it's a combination. I think the call to serve on city council has specifically changed. I think God is pulling me away from that. I don't think the call to the community has changed. I think that this is opening the door for a new way to serve. I know, because of my time on council, I know so much more about how municipalities function, how we make decisions, what role the citizens have in that or don't, what role council has in decision making and doesn't have, what authority we give our administrator, for example, that oftentimes council members and mayors become the face of, when in reality that's a staff decision and council supports the staff decision. So I think it's giving me an opportunity to continue. I don't think of this as the call shrinking back into only serving my people. I think the branches have been established well. I'm a very visible and known face in the community. And as a result, I think it gives me a different opportunity to serve, perhaps even a little more authentically, not having to wear the two hats.
Audrey, tell me more about the calling. Is the calling to serve, or is the calling to achieve something specific? Is it about the process or is it about some end result?
I think it's the process for me.
Can you tell me what that means?
There's a saying that I heard from the first pastor I ever worked for, which is, a call is that which you can do no other. And so when it's vocation oriented, I feel, or end goal oriented, you work towards that thing which you can do no other. For me, the call of a pastor is vocation oriented. That's my job. And as a result, it shapes everything I do. And so that's why I say it's process oriented, because I can only do what God's directing me to do. I have free will and I'm going to mess it up, right? And I'm going to say, God, I ain't going to do that. And then God's going to fix that. You know what I mean? God's going to close the door. God's going to, veer. And I think, I don't want this to sound conceited or holier than thou, but I think that's what happens when we have a deeply intimate relationship with Christ. When we live into, those of us who are Christians or believers of any faith, when we live into that faith, we are directed and guided by the Spirit. And I have always tried to live my life like that. And I think what I have established, well, not established, but I think what I'm experiencing is that maturity of recognizing this is what it means to do God's will in the world. And so that's what I mean by the process is it is work, right? Because we do work. We're not, sitting in the throes of ancient Rome just thinking about all of these things.
Right. You described this in our first interview as the dual roles, kind of like a marriage. And you said,
the marriage has not always been a seamless one.
So what made the marriage between the civic side of your work and the church leadership more complicated over time? And I just wonder, was there a specific turning point that made you realize it was no longer sustainable to carry both of those roles at the same time?
When our decisions as a council became a little more directly impactful to individuals, it started getting sticky. So I'll give you an example. We had a coffee shop in town. They were a faith-based coffee shop, and for one reason or another, they did not pay a hospitality tax payment. And that went unpaid. So the staff, which is their right and their decision to make, suspended their business license because they refused to pay
The city staff suspended the faith-based coffee shop's business license.
Right. They were told they could have a special hearing at the next council meeting. They did. They came to that council meeting. I was a regular customer in that coffee shop. Several of us on council were. I mean, we loved having the coffee shop in town. And so I want to be clear about that.
But the coffee shop wasn't a specific part of your church specifically?
No.
Right. So it wasn't a conflict of interest that it was a business venture upon which you relied.
No.
It was just a business venture that you loved.
Yeah,
okay.
We all did. But they refused to acknowledge that they owed 1 month of hospitality taxes. They didn't want to pay the money.
And as a
council member, and it really even as a pastor, either one, I'm recognizing right is right and wrong is wrong. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, right? Like
pay the taxes.
Pay the taxes.
Yeah.
We unanimously voted not to accept their appeal to renew their business license without paying the taxes.
Okay.
The deal was
you held a hard line.
We held the hard line with the staff. We supported the staff. A young person that I knew in a little bit of a different role, but I had come to know and love, not a church member. So the lines are not really directly muddy. It's just my presence in the community as a pastor is impacted, was deeply wounded by my being a part of that, by some of the things that I said directly to the business owners. Because what I was trying to convey to them was they're not paying the hospitality. So another piece of this story is we had just kind of emptied out our fund balance where we had extra money in the hospitality fund, and we were using that to give grants to nonprofits. That's a common practice with your H-tax grants, right? Well, we had run that down. And so we had just passed that year a budget that did not include hospitality tax grants, with the understanding that we would bring those H-tax grants back when we built up the fund balance again, okay? So in my head, this local business that is refusing to pay this hospitality tax is directly impacting our ability to increase and grow this fund balance. And I tried to make that point to them. And whether my words stumbled or they were just hard-lined, they felt very attacked by what I said. And the young woman that I had a great relationship with, that was an employee of the coffee shop, was there, and she was deeply hurt. And that is the beginning for me when this felt sticky.
When being a council member felt sticky, even though, as I'm hearing you relate the story, the business had done something irresponsible.
Right.
And it didn't matter that it was faith-based or not.
No.
It was just that this was a business that you liked, that you frequented, and they weren't doing what was required of them.
Right.
And yet somehow this is the example of it began to feel icky.
Yeah.
Because as a council member, you are now enforcing something that by all rights they owed.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I don't see the dichotomy there.
It's about the interpersonal relationships more than anything. It's not.
Are you saying
decision.
if you weren't on council, that it would have been easier for you to be on her side?
No, I would not have been on her side at all.
Then
I don't think
it.
I would have been put in the position. If I were not on council, I wouldn't have been put in that decision. I would not have been put in that position.
Audrey, I'm going to press you on this because I really want to understand your thinking. If your calling is to serve, and service in this moment means helping a business understand that not just the legal thing to do, but the moral thing to do is to pay the debt that they're supposed to pay, that they're obligated to pay under the law, why is that not an expression of service?
It is. I don't think there's quite a dichotomy. Where it got messy, where the dual hats got messy, was in the interpersonal relationships that I had formed.
You mean because it got personal?
Yes. And if I were not on council, I would not have had interpersonal relationships impacted because I would not have been the decision maker. Would I have agreed with the decision? Would I have seen it as service? Yes. But it wouldn't have been me making that call.
It's such an interesting thing because there was a quote that you said in our first interview, and I was going to repeat it back to you. You said that
there was concern about what happens if people start blasting city council. How does that splatter back on the church?
Now, the example that you just gave is not an example of the blood splattering back on the church. It's splattering back on you personally.
Which also splatters back on the church.
How so?
Because in my conversation with the leaders, that is the example that they brought up.
That's the example. That you did something that brought disagreement upon yourself, and by bringing it upon yourself, it brings it upon the church, and the church is just what? Allergic to being confrontational, even about civic responsibilities?
I don't think so. I think that there's sensitivity to, and maybe it's small town dynamic, I think there's sensitivity to the interpersonal relationships and the church being sensitive to, and the community recognizing your pastor's the one that got quoted, not Councilwoman Audrey Reese. And so that's where it gets murky, right? It was not Councilwoman Audrey Reese.
It was Reverend.
It was Reverend Audrey Reese. got quoted. Isn't that your pastor? I mean, that was the talk and the chatter among town. You know, the ladies are walking, some church members and some not. And, oh, isn't that your pastor? Didn't she say that? They were taking hospitality tax money away from these nonprofits? And I did.
Audrey,
and I stand by it.
Do you think the situation would have been different if instead of it being a faith-based coffee shop, if it had been, I don't know, if it had been a liquor store, if it had been any other type of business, would the same issues have come up?
No, and again, it's a delicate balance. I have to be careful. That's the example that got brought to me. Yeah. And that is when things started feeling unsettling in my gut. When the thoughts of, if I weren't on council, I wouldn't be faced or forced with this.
You said this in our interview. You said,
John Calvin, the founder of our faith, said, there's no greater calling than that of civic service. And I have to say that I have found that to be true, that the hats aren't nearly as different as I thought they were going to be. And yet, 11 years into being a pastor, as you pointed out in that conversation in June, that is my identity. That is my role. And so I walk into a city council meeting or a conversation with a constituent wearing that, whether it's necessary or intentional. It's a part of who I am. It's how I identify and how I'm seen in the community.
And so what you've discovered is, even though the church recognizes civic responsibility, has no objection to it, this wasn't a fight about whether a faith-based coffee shop should pay this particular tax. This is really about you as a sitting council member and being continually identified with the church, even as you're doing civic responsibilities. You kind of wish that, I don't know if there's a local newspaper or whoever was writing about this on social media, instead of referring to you as the Reverend, if they could have just kept this under your council member hat, if that might have eased the tensions between the two. But that, in your experience, that's not the way the world works. These two things are necessarily on top of each other.
They are. And even if I had been referred to as councilwoman rather than Reverend, I think what I realized, what I was getting close to realizing a year ago or a year and a half ago, and what I do realize now is that pastor hat is on whatever I do. There's no taking it off. And that's the identity. And that's okay. I mean, that's good. That's what I want. That's who I am. It's definitely a part of who I am. And it does drive my decisions, and drove that one. Did
you think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago that they would actually be separated out?
I don't think I thought that they would ever be completely separate, because again, that's the faith that I have. I'm directed and guided by the Spirit.
So what is it that you've learned in the last couple of years about this, about having these two, not identities isn't the right word, but these
roles.
Two roles?
For me, this is not the case for everyone. For me, one of those roles is dispensable and one of them is indispensable. And the role that is dispensable is the role of council member. The role of pastor is not dispensable, because that's a part of my identity. And that began to take shape in August of 24 when we had that hearing for the coffee shop. And after that, it became abundantly clear I could walk away from this at any time. And that was long before I had a conversation with church leadership. That was 2 months before I heard an inkling of folks being unhappy. So
you were feeling unsettled personally, and then you heard the calling that said, it's time to get off.
Yeah, because one's dispensable, the other's not.
I don't mean to make light of it, but if you had woken up from that power nap, but instead of the voice of God telling you to do this, if instead in your power nap you had, I don't know, the mayor or someone, and their voice was, different, which is, you need to stay here and grind this out. Would that have had any great impact?
Yeah, no.
You mentioned earlier how coming on to council was to help heal some of the division that had taken place. And when I first interviewed you, you said,
this council for the past almost 2 years now that we have been serving together has gotten along beautifully.
So tell me how that spirit has been throughout. What have you experienced over the time, and where is it now as you're making your exit?
I think that's one of the things I can leave very, very proud of, is we did the work. You know, I think what I witnessed, and I've told council this isn't any type of secret to them, our honeymoon phase wore off. Ironically, all about the same time, even though we agreed with but it just, that was just sort of when we were comfortable with one another. The honeymoon phase ended, and then you have to kind of learn who that person is, right? And how they're operating in the world without the rose-colored glasses on, you know what I mean? And so what was true then is still true now. And what I'm most proud of is working through some personality differences, some minor, not really irrelevant, but just things that every council works through and staff works through, getting those navigated in a way that, while the tension was there at times for a couple of meetings, finally having the moment to sit down and say, okay, we're not gonna be that again. Mm-hmm. And all of us, council and staff, making the decision, that's not an option. Whereas I think that's a new iteration of where we've come from. I think when we came together for the first time in 2021, the goal was to just to calm down.
Right.
You know, just don't show up in the paper for screaming at one another. Right. And so we kind of walked on eggshells around each other for a little while, still liked each other and all that good stuff. But then when we realized we were comfortable and we could sit down at table and be real with one another, we had to figure out how to do that. And it was beautiful to witness.
No, thank you.
It was beautiful to witness, because I think we discovered we all genuinely still love one another, which is what makes this also a hard decision to make.
Because you've worked with these other council members, and there is a respect and a trust and a relationship that matters.
And my hope is that I can move on to the other side of the dais and be a supportive community member. I can show up to council meetings just to say, hey, instead of showing up to fuss, and live into what I've spent the past 3 years trying to get community members to understand we want.
Audrey, I think my favorite takeaway from our first interview was your statement that
we talk at Westminster Presbyterian all the time about the fact that worship on Sunday is 11 is how we nourish our souls to go out and do what God calls us to do in the world.
So Sunday is what nourishes you, and the rest of the week you actually have to go out and do it.
Yeah, you got to go do something. You got to go do what God's calling you to do.
Now you're stepping away from elected office. I'm curious, what does actually doing it look like for you in your next chapter?
The same. Stepping out and doing it on council is just like stepping out and doing it not on council. It's being guided by God. Waking up every day and saying, let's go, do the work of the Lord, be the hands and feet of Christ.
Final question for you, Audrey. The last time we spoke, you offered encouragement to those who were just beginning their leadership journey.
My advice is to go forth and do that which you can do no other. To answer however you understand it, answer the call, answer the voice that just won't stop nagging you.
This time I want to flip it. What would you say to someone who's already served faithfully and with heart, but who's now wondering for themselves if it's time to step away? How do you know when it's time to let go? And how do you make peace with that decision?
For me, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. A call is that which you can do no other. And so if I'm going to be so convicted that God's calling me to it, I have to recognize when God's calling me away from it. And for someone that feels that tug away, my answer is, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. You know.
But Audrey, not everyone has the voice of God telling them in the moment. Some
I
people
know.
are just
That's
feeling tired or feeling spent.
Yeah. So when do you know? That's a good question. And I don't know that I'm going to be the one that has the end all be all answer, but I will say whenever you know it's time to leave anything. That's the beauty of civic service and elected leadership, right? Is a term comes up. So the hope is that you spend time in reflection or conversation, God, not God, discerning. Because I think discerning what our next steps are is a sign of maturity.
Yeah.
And so I think you can spend some time in a discernment process and you hopefully will come to an understanding of it's greener sometimes.
I think I'm hoping even for a more pastoral answer, which is, I imagine somewhere you preach about it's not just what you want, it's also about what you're willing to let go.
Yeah. I think the pastoral answer would be leaders that have served, that are faithful but tired. Again, well done, good and faithful servant. Rest.
Audrey, it's just such a pleasure to talk to you, and congratulations on making a tough decision and on your calling and your commitment to it and recognizing when it was time to move in that direction. And so thank you for your candor and for your openness and your willingness to share this. And I am sure that there are people who are going to listen to this who are going to find it not just inspiring, but really instructive for them as well.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and for your mentorship through your podcast, through your coaching, and through these conversations.
I'm thrilled to do it. Thanks again to my guest, Reverend and former council member, Audrey Hartness-Reese of Westminster, South Carolina. If you found this conversation valuable, please follow the show and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps other community leaders find this space for shared learning. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. This podcast is all about real-world leadership, and we'd love to include your voice in the conversation. So here's a question for you. Have you ever made the decision to step away from something like a role or a responsibility because it no longer felt right? What did you learn from that experience? Call me at 602-688-2724 and leave a message. Your story might be featured in a future episode. And if you or someone you know has an experience in local or civic leadership and a story worth sharing, check out the podcast guest link in the show notes. We are always looking for people whose perspectives can inspire and inform others on a similar path. And here's a final thought before we go. To Audrey, and to everyone who has made the courageous decision to step away from a role of community leadership, thank you. Just as I deeply admire the choice to step up and serve, I hold equal respect and gratitude for those who recognize when it's time to step back. It's the effort, the intention, and the willingness to lead that matter, regardless of how long that chapter lasts. We respect your decision and we wish you well. And to Audrey specifically, thank you for your openness in sharing this moment with us. Your honesty, your reflection, your willingness to let others learn from your experience, that in itself is a profound act of service. On behalf of all of our listeners, thank you. And we'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.